That old junk car again? Mom, are you serious? My son laughed, right in front of the entire dealership, completely unaware that every employee standing there worked under my name. I kept my hand steady on the steering wheel of my old Chevy Impala as I pulled into the parking lot of Lawson Auto Plaza. The paint was faded. The engine rattled like it had survived too many winters. But it still ran, just like me. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. At 67, people think I should disappear quietly into the background of someone else's life. That's exactly what my son David seems to believe too. As I stepped out of the car, I heard it before I saw it. A laugh. Sharp. Disrespectful. My daughter-in-law, Karen Mitchell, stood near the glass showroom doors holding her phone up. "Guys, look at this," she said loudly, turning the camera toward me. "This is what failure looks like at 67. Still driving that." She smiled into the screen like she was entertaining an audience. Behind her, a few customers glanced over, then quickly looked away. The kind of look people give when they don't want to get involved. David walked up beside her, adjusting his watch. "Mom," he sighed, like I was a problem he couldn't fix. "We talked about this. Just sell that junk car. It's embarrassing showing up like this." I didn't answer, not because I had nothing to say, but because I learned a long time ago, some people only hear silence when it's too late. We walked inside. The showroom floor was polished like glass. New cars lined up under perfect lighting. Every reflection looked expensive, controlled, clean. And then there was me, a woman in a plain gray coat, standing between luxury machines like a ghost from a different life. I noticed the employees first. Two of them near the service desk stopped talking. One of them, a young man with a name tag, Ethan, stared at me too long, like he knew me. Then his face changed. Not confusion, recognition. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. He took one step back from the counter like he had seen something he was not supposed to see. Karen noticed nothing. She kept filming. "Seriously, David," she whispered, but loud enough for others to hear. "We can't keep bringing her here. It's bad for image." David didn't respond. He just looked at me the way people look at outdated furniture they forgot to throw away. That was when Ethan dropped his clipboard. The sound cracked through the showroom like a gunshot. Everyone turned. He bent down slowly, but when he stood up again, his hands were shaking. "Ma'am," he said. Just that. One word. But it carried something heavy. Respect. Fear. Confusion. Karen rolled her eyes. "Ignore him. She just wanders in here sometimes." But Ethan wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me like the floor beneath my feet had suddenly changed. I didn't know you were coming today," he said quietly. David frowned. "You know her?" Ethan swallowed hard. He stopped, because the glass doors behind us opened, and the entire atmosphere shifted. Every employee straightened. Even the music from the showroom speakers seemed quieter. A man in a dark suit stepped inside. The general manager. Then another man followed. And suddenly I heard a whisper behind me. "Why is he here?" The GM's eyes scanned the room once, then landed on me. Everything stopped. He froze mid-step. His face drained of color so fast, it looked like someone had turned off the light inside him. The folder in his hand slipped slightly. "Ma'am Lawson," he said, very softly, like saying my name too loudly would break something important. David looked between us, confused. "Mom," he said, "why is he calling you that?" Karen stopped filming. For the first time, her phone lowered. Ethan took another step back, whispering under his breath like a warning he couldn't hold in anymore. She's not just a visitor." The GM cleared his throat, but his voice cracked slightly. "Everyone, please step aside." And then he looked at me again, longer this time, like he was trying to decide whether reality had just shifted. "I wasn't informed you would inspect the facility today." Inspect. That word landed heavier than anything David had said all morning. I slowly turned my head toward my son. His expression was changing now. Confusion first, then discomfort, then something worse. Uncertainty. "Inspect," he repeated. "Mom, what is he talking about?" I didn't answer him, because I noticed something else. The way every employee had suddenly gone silent. The way Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes anymore. The way the GM's hands were now trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie. And for the first time since I arrived, I realized something important. They weren't reacting to my presence. They were reacting to my identity. And none of them had told my son yet. Not even Karen. Not even David. I looked around the showroom one more time. At the cars. At the employees. At the polished glass reflecting a woman they thought they could laugh at. Then I spoke quietly, almost gently. You really shouldn't have laughed at that car, I said. A pause. Small. Sharp. And then I added, it's been parked here longer than any of you have worked in this building. The GM went pale again. Ethan whispered one sentence under his breath. Oh my God, she's Lawson. And that was when I noticed it. The way the security guard at the entrance had just reached for his radio. Like someone upstairs had just given a very different kind of instruction. But what they didn't know yet was that I hadn't even shown them the most important document I was carrying. Not yet. The GM's words still echoed in the showroom. Inspect. That single word had frozen everything, but I didn't move. I simply stood there, watching the room shift around me like a tide, changing direction without warning. David stepped closer to me, his voice lower now. Mom, what is going on? Why is he talking like that? For the first time this morning, there was no sarcasm in his tone, only confusion, and something underneath it, unease. Karen quickly lowered her phone. Okay, this is getting weird, she muttered. Ethan, what did you mean she's Lawson? Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes stayed locked on me, like he was trying to confirm something he already knew but didn't have permission to say out loud. The GM finally raised his hand slightly, signaling the staff. Everyone return to your stations, he said, but his voice wasn't steady. Now. No one moved immediately. That alone told me everything. In places like this, employees don't hesitate unless they're afraid of the next instruction. And fear was now in the air. David looked between them again, more frustrated now. This is ridiculous, he said. Mom, did you do something here? I turned slightly toward him. Not angry, not defensive, just calm. I didn't do anything today, I said softly. But you should ask better questions before you assume what I am. That made him stop. Just for a second. Karen scoffed nervously, trying to regain control of the moment. Look, this is just some misunderstanding. She probably knows someone who works here. Let's just go. But she didn't finish. Because the GM suddenly stepped forward. And this time, he spoke directly to me. Ma'am Lawson, he said again, more carefully now. Would you prefer to continue this conversation in your office? My office. David's head snapped toward him immediately. My what? Karen blinked rapidly. Your office? Since when does she? Ethan finally whispered, barely audible. She owns the majority holdings, right? The words hit the space like a dropped glass. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the background noise of the showroom seemed to dull. David's expression tightened. That's impossible, he said. Mom doesn't own anything like this. She drives a 20-year-old car. I heard him. Every word. But I didn't react. Because this wasn't new to me. This was how they always measured me. By what I looked like. Not by what I built. The GM cleared his throat again. Sir, he said carefully to David, I think there has been a misunderstanding about your mother's position. Karen turned sharply. What position? Silence. A long one. And in that silence, I noticed something subtle. The employees had started avoiding eye contact with David. Not me. David. That shift was important. Because in any system, respect doesn't disappear randomly. It moves. Ethan stepped back toward the service counter, but I caught him glance once more at me. Fear now replaced curiosity. And then I noticed the security guard again. Still at the entrance. Still holding his radio. But now, watching the GM instead of the customers. Something was happening upstairs. A decision being made without words. David exhaled sharply. Mom, he said again, slower this time. Tell me what's going on. Right now. I looked at him. Really looked at him. My son. The boy I once carried through snowstorms. The man who now stood in front of me like I was a stranger he couldn't categorize. I came here for one reason, I said quietly. Not to explain myself. Karen crossed her arms tightly. Of course, she said, forcing a laugh. She always does this. Dramatic entrances, confusing people, acting like she has secrets. But her voice cracked slightly at the end. Because even she didn't believe it anymore. The GM finally spoke again. Ma'am Lawson, he said carefully. We received confirmation this morning from corporate. Your presence was not expected at the dealership floor today. David turned sharply. Corporate. That word landed differently. He wasn't laughing anymore. He wasn't dismissing anything. Now he was trying to connect pieces that didn't fit his version of reality. And that's when I saw it. The first crack. Not in the room. In him. Karen noticed it too. She stepped closer to him. David, this is nonsense. She doesn't even have business cards. She doesn't even— Stop, he snapped suddenly. It wasn't loud, but it cut through everything. Karen froze. So did I? David stared at the GM now. Say it clearly, he said. What is my mother to this company? The GM hesitated, just long enough for the entire showroom to hold its breath. Then he spoke, carefully. We were informed she is a primary stakeholder. A pause, then softer, and final authority in ownership decisions. The room went still. Not silent. Still, like the air itself had stopped moving. Karen's phone slipped slightly in her hand. David didn't blink, and for the first time since I walked in, I saw it fully form in his eyes. Realization, not of what I said, but of what he had been wrong about for a very long time. Behind him, Ethan whispered again, almost like prayer, "Oh my God." And somewhere in the back of the showroom, a computer screen lit up automatically. A system login page, with one line already pre-filled. Owner. Access. M. Lawson, the GM, noticed it at the same time I did. His face drained again, and I realized something simple. They hadn't even started telling the truth yet. They were only reacting to the edge of it. The silence in the showroom didn't break. It tightened, like everyone was afraid that even breathing too loudly would collapse whatever reality we were standing in. The words were still hanging there. Primary stakeholder, final authority. David slowly turned back to me. But something in his face had changed now. Not disbelief anymore. Not dismissal. Calculation. Like he was trying to rebuild the entire last 20 years of his life using a puzzle that suddenly didn't match the picture on the box. Karen let out a sharp laugh. It sounded fake even to her own ears. This is ridiculous, she said quickly. David, you're not actually listening to this, right? She's your mother. She drives a broken-down Chevy. She doesn't own anything. No one answered her. Not even David. Because his eyes were no longer on Karen. They were on the GM. Say it again, David said slowly. Clearly, the GM swallowed hard. I said, corporate records confirm Margaret Lawson is the majority owner of Lawson Auto Plaza and affiliated holdings. The name hit the air like a hammer. And for the first time, I saw my son's posture shift. Just slightly, but enough. Karen stepped back. No, she whispered. That's not possible. Ethan finally spoke again, voice trembling. It's true. I saw her signature in the internal registry file. David snapped toward him immediately. You what? Ethan looked like he regretted existing in that moment. I didn't know who she was at first, he said quickly. But her authorization code, it matches the legacy owner profile. Legacy. That word made everything heavier. I could feel eyes on me now from every corner of the showroom. Not curiosity anymore. Not confusion. Recognition. And fear. The GM took a careful step closer to me again. Ma'am Lawson, there is also a pending internal directive from corporate headquarters requesting confirmation of operational oversight. He hesitated before continuing. And your presence here was flagged as unexpected. David exhaled sharply. This is insane, he said again, but his voice was thinner now. Mom, tell them this is some mistake. Just say it's a mistake. He looked at me like I still had the power to make this disappear. Like I had been hiding something small, not something that controlled the entire room. Karen suddenly grabbed his arm. David, stop, she said urgently. This is some kind of fraud or confusion. We need to leave. But David didn't move. Because something else was happening behind him. The employees were no longer pretending. They were watching me openly now. One of them whispered to another. She's the one who signed the original acquisition documents. Another voice answered. No, that can't be her. But none of them left. No one laughed anymore. The GM's phone buzzed. Once. Then again. He looked down at it. His expression changed instantly. And I already knew what it was before he spoke. Corporate compliance team is requesting immediate confirmation, he said quietly. They want to know if you are present on site. David turned pale. Compliance team? The GM nodded stiffly. Yes, sir. This is above regional management now. Karen finally lost her composure. What is going on? She snapped. Why is this turning into some kind of corporate drama over her showing up in an old car? But even as she said it, her voice was shaking. Because no one was reacting to the car anymore. No one was reacting to her words anymore either. They were reacting to something far bigger. I stepped forward slightly. And immediately, the entire showroom reacted. Not loudly, but physically. Two employees stepped aside without being told. The GM lowered his head slightly. Even Ethan looked away. David noticed it. His voice dropped. "Mom," he said carefully, "what exactly did Dad leave you?" That question landed differently. Not accusatory. Not mocking. For the first time, he sounded afraid of the answer. Karen turned toward him. "David, don't." But he didn't hear her anymore. His focus stayed on me. Waiting. The showroom felt smaller now, like the walls had moved closer without anyone noticing. I looked at my son, and for a brief moment, I saw him not as he was now, but as he used to be. A boy who once trusted me without question. Then I spoke. Calmly. "I didn't come here to explain my past," I said. "I came here because someone thought it was acceptable to laugh at what I drive." A pause. Small. Controlled. Then I added, "But I see now, that wasn't the real problem." Silence tightened again. Karen's breathing became uneven. David didn't interrupt. He couldn't, because something in my tone had shifted the room completely. Not anger. Not emotion. Authority. And for the first time, even he understood that whatever came next was not something he could interrupt by simply asking questions. The moment David asked that question, the air in the showroom changed again. "What exactly did Dad leave you?" It wasn't loud, but it cut deeper than anything Karen had said all morning. Because now it wasn't about embarrassment. It was about inheritance. About control. About truth that had been sitting quietly for years without anyone daring to open it. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I was uncertain, but because I was remembering. And memories like that don't come back gently. They arrive in fragments. Paper. Ink. A lawyer's office. My late husband Robert sitting across from me, calm, deliberate. "If anything ever happens to me," he had said, asterisk, "they will try to reduce you to nothing." Asterisk, I remember laughing back then. I didn't believe him. Not about my own children. Not about David. But now, standing in this showroom, I realized he hadn't been warning me. He had been preparing me. Karen broke the silence first. "This is ridiculous," she snapped again, but her voice was losing structure. "You're all acting like she's some kind of secret billionaire. She's just..." "Stop talking." David's voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough that Karen froze instantly. Everyone turned to him. Even the GM. David's eyes stayed on me. "Mom," he said again, slower. "Tell me the truth." I studied him. Not the boy he used to be. The man he had become. And I realized something uncomfortable. He wasn't asking out of curiosity. He was asking because his entire life had started to tilt. "I didn't build this company yesterday," I said quietly. That was the first line. Not an explanation. A warning. The GM swallowed hard. "Ma'am Lawson, should we continue this discussion in a private office?" I shook my head slightly. No, one word. Simple. Final. That made the entire room tense again. Because now everyone understood, this wasn't accidental exposure. This was controlled exposure. I turned slightly, letting my eyes move across the showroom. The polished floor. The glass walls. The employees standing too still. The customers pretending not to listen. And I spoke again. "Your father didn't just leave me money," I said. A pause. "I was there when Lawson Auto started as a single repair shop with 5 employees." David's expression tightened. Karen blinked fast. "That's impossible," she whispered. "You never worked in anything like this." I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't soften my voice. "You never asked." That landed harder than I expected. Because Karen's confidence cracked for a fraction of a second. Just enough. I continued. "When your father expanded the first dealership, he signed everything under joint structure. My name was on every controlling document." The GM slowly lowered his head, like he already knew where this was going. "But after he passed," I said, "I stepped away from visibility." David's voice came out quieter now. "Why?" That question. Simple, but heavy. I hesitated for the first time. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because the answer wasn't simple enough for this room. "Because grief makes people underestimate you," I said finally. "And I wanted to see what kind of world you would build without me standing in the center of it." Silence again, but different this time. Heavier. Like the room itself was absorbing meaning it didn't want. Karen suddenly laughed again, but it sounded broken. "So what?" she said. "You're saying you've been watching us." I didn't deny it. I didn't confirm it either. That was enough. David took a step closer. His voice dropped even lower. "Mom, are you saying you own this place?" The GM answered before I could. "Yes," he said quietly. "She does." No hesitation this time. No ambiguity. Just truth. David closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them again, something in him had shifted completely. Karen stepped back. No, she said again, weaker now. No, this doesn't make sense. She drives that old car. She doesn't. Enough, David said again. But this time, he wasn't stopping her. He was stopping reality from breaking further in his mind. He turned back to me. Why didn't you tell me? That question carried something else underneath it. Not anger, not disbelief, but injury. I looked at him for a long moment and answered honestly, because I wanted to know what you would do with power you thought I didn't have. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was collapsing, and somewhere in the distance, I saw Ethan lower his head completely now, like he was realizing he had been standing in front of a truth too large to pretend ignorance anymore. The GM's phone buzzed again. He didn't even look at it this time, because whatever was coming from corporate no longer mattered as much as what was standing in front of them right now. Me and my son. And the moment he finally understood that the woman they had been laughing at all morning was the one who had built the room they were standing in. The showroom didn't feel like a showroom anymore. It felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been written, but no one had dared to read it out loud. David stood frozen in front of me, not speaking, not moving, just staring like he was waiting for the ground beneath him to rearrange itself into something more believable. Karen, on the other hand, couldn't stay silent. No, she said again, but weaker now. This doesn't make sense. If she owned anything, we would have known. We managed the family finances. We, stop saying we, David cut in sharply. That was the first time he turned on her. Not loudly, but cleanly, like something inside him had already separated truth from comfort. Karen blinked, stunned. David, what are you talking about? But he wasn't looking at her anymore. His eyes stayed on me, like I was suddenly the only fixed point in the room. The GM stepped forward slightly, his voice cautious. Sir, there are sealed corporate documents confirming full ownership structure under Margaret Lawson, established shortly after the original founder's passing. David's jaw tightened. Sealed, he repeated. Yes, the GM said. Restricted access. Karen let out a short, nervous laugh. So what? She's been secretly controlling everything behind our backs. That's insane. But no one responded to her this time, because the pattern was already breaking. Ethan, still standing near the service counter, finally spoke again, but this time his voice was almost inaudible. I saw the legacy file once years ago. I thought it was just internal history. David turned sharply. What file? Ethan hesitated, then added quietly. It listed her as the operational backbone of Lawson Expansion Phase 1 and the final signature authority after Mr. Lawson's death. The words didn't feel real in the room. They felt like something too large for the space to contain. David stepped back slightly. Just one step. But I noticed it. Karen noticed it too. And that scared her more than anything else today. You're lying, she said quickly, pointing at Ethan. You're all confusing him. This is some kind of mistake, Karen. David's voice stopped her again. But this time it was different. No anger, just exhaustion, like he had reached the edge of what he could deny. He turned toward me slowly. Mom, he said again. But the words sounded different now. Smaller, heavier. Why didn't you ever tell me the scale of this? I looked at him, and for the first time, I let the silence stretch. Because this was the part no one liked hearing. Not even him. Because people don't respect what they already think they understand, I said quietly. A pause. And I needed to see how you would treat someone you believed had nothing. That sentence landed harder than anything else so far. Karen shook her head repeatedly. No, this is not happening. You don't just own a company like this. You don't just. The GM interrupted her gently. Ma'am, she doesn't just own it. Silence. He continued. She structured it. That word changed the air again. David frowned. Structured? The GM nodded. Yes. Trust layers. Operational delegation. She stepped back from visibility but retained final authority. Across all subsidiaries. Karen's face went pale for the first time, because she understood what that meant before anyone explained it. Control without appearance. Power without recognition. David looked at me again, but this time, there was something breaking in his expression. Not disbelief, not confusion, but something closer to regret. Mom, he said slowly. All this time, we thought you were just. He stopped. Couldn't finish. I finished it for him. Helpless. That word sat between us. Sharp. Uncomfortable. True. David looked down for a moment. then back up. And when he spoke again, his voice was quieter than before. We didn't know. I nodded once. I know. Karen suddenly stepped forward again, trying to regain control. So what now? She snapped. You're going to punish us? Throw us out? Because we didn't treat you like a queen? The room went still again. Even David didn't interrupt. Because that question revealed something deeper. Fear of consequence. Not understanding. I turned slightly toward her, and my voice stayed calm. I didn't come here to punish anyone, I said. A pause. But I did come here to see something very clearly. I looked at David, then back at Karen. And I think I have. Karen was the first one to break after that silence. But not in the way she expected. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. Her voice came out smaller, tight, unstable. So what now? She repeated, but this time it wasn't defiance anymore. It was fear pretending to still be in control. Are you just going to take everything from us? David didn't answer her. Not immediately, because his eyes were still on me. And I could see it clearly now. He wasn't looking for denial anymore. He was looking for limits. For the edge of what was real. For the point where this would stop making sense again. But I didn't give him that relief. Instead, I took one slow step forward. The showroom reacted instantly. Not loudly, but physically. A few employees straightened again. The GM lowered his head slightly. Even Ethan stopped breathing properly for a moment. That was when I noticed something important. They weren't afraid of me speaking. They were afraid of me deciding. Karen noticed it too, and it made her panic sharper. This is insane, she said again, forcing her voice up. You can't just walk in here and rewrite everything because you decided to show up in a broken car today. I turned my head slightly toward her. And this time, I didn't soften anything. That car, I said calmly, is the reason this company exists in its current form. Silence dropped again. David frowned immediately. What do you mean? I looked at him, and for the first time, I let him see the full weight of what he had been avoiding all morning. Your father didn't build this alone, I said. He built it with me handling the expansion agreements, supplier contracts, and early acquisition negotiations. The GM slowly exhaled like he already knew this part, but David didn't. Karen shook her head again. No, that's not true. You stayed home. You raised. Stop guessing my life, I said quietly. Not angry, just final. That shut her up immediately. I continued. When your father passed, I didn't remove myself from the system. I absorbed the risk layer. I kept the structure alive while everyone else assumed I had stepped away. David's voice came out lower. So, you were involved the whole time? I nodded once. Yes. A pause. And you never saw it. That last sentence landed differently. Not accusation. Observation. David's expression tightened. Because that was the part he couldn't argue with. Karen suddenly turned to him again. David, this is manipulation, she said quickly. She's rewriting history to justify enough. David said it again. But this time, there was something different in his tone. Not confusion anymore. Fatigue. Like he was tired of defending a version of reality that kept collapsing. The GM stepped forward slightly again. Sir, he said carefully, there are archived contracts dating back 22 years. Her signature appears on foundational expansion agreements. David looked at him, then at me, then back at Karen. And I saw it. The shift. Not acceptance. Not understanding. But destabilization. Like he couldn't hold both versions of me in his mind at the same time anymore. Karen noticed it too, and it scared her more than anything else. No, she whispered again. You're on her side now? Ethan finally spoke again, but his voice was quieter than before. No one is on anyone's side, he said. We're just reading what's already there. That sentence hit harder than expected, because it removed emotion from the equation. Only facts remained. David ran a hand through his hair slowly. This doesn't make sense, he said again, but it sounded less like denial now. More like exhaustion. If you had this level of control, why let us treat you like? He stopped. He couldn't finish it. I finished it for him again. Like I didn't matter? The silence that followed was heavier than before. Karen looked away first. That told me everything. David didn't. But his eyes dropped slightly. And that was enough. I stepped closer to him now. Not invading. Just closing the distance. You asked what your father left me, I said quietly. A pause. This is not inheritance. Another pause. This is continuity. The GM shifted uncomfortably at that word, because he understood its meaning. Karen didn't. David slowly lifted his head. And this time, his voice was different. Not demanding. Not defensive, just uncertain. So what happens now? That question changed the room again. Because it wasn't about truth anymore. It was about consequences. And for the first time since I walked into this showroom, everyone was waiting for my answer. The question hung in the air longer than anything else had today. So what happens now? David said it quietly, not as a challenge, not as a demand, but as someone standing at the edge of a truth he could no longer step back from. For a moment, I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because this was the moment everything had been building toward. Karen looked between us quickly. Her voice came out sharper again, almost desperate. David, you can't be serious right now. She walks in here, drops some story about ownership, and you're actually listening to her. But David didn't look at her anymore. That was new. That was the shift. His attention stayed on me. The GM stepped forward slightly, lowering his voice. Ma'am Lawson, if you intend to issue any directives, corporate protocol requires confirmation of stop. I said it quietly, but it cut through everything. Even him. Even the room. Silence returned instantly. I turned slightly toward David. And this time, I didn't soften anything. What happens now, I said slowly, depends on what you decide to do with what you just learned. David frowned. What I decide? I nodded. Yes. A pause. This is still your company in practice. You've been operating within it, benefiting from it, representing it. That sentence made Karen tense instantly. David didn't interrupt. I continued. But ownership and responsibility are not the same thing. Another pause. And today is the first time you've been forced to see the difference. The room felt tighter again. Even Ethan stopped shifting his weight. Karen suddenly stepped forward. This is ridiculous, she snapped again. You're trying to turn this into some moral lesson. No. I turned to her fully now. And my voice stayed calm. I'm correcting a misunderstanding. That stopped her. Not because it was loud, but because it was final. I looked back at David. And there are 3 things you need to understand before anything else happens. David didn't move. He just listened. First, I said, nothing here today is new. It has only become visible. A pause. Second, your reaction to this visibility matters more than your ignorance ever did. Karen's jaw tightened. Third, I continued, this company does not function on emotion. It functions on structure. The GM lowered his head slightly again, because he understood exactly what I meant. David exhaled slowly. So you're saying, I've been living in a system I didn't understand? Yes. That answer was simple. Too simple. And that made it worse. Karen suddenly laughed again, but it was hollow. So what now? You fire everyone. You take control. You erase us. I turned to her. And for the first time, there was something colder in my voice. No one is being erased. A pause. But roles will be clarified. That sentence hit differently. David looked at me carefully now. What does that mean? I studied him. And I saw something I hadn't seen earlier. Not entitlement. Not arrogance. Confusion mixed with something. Closer to realization. You wanted to know what happens now, I said. A pause. Now you see whether you are part of the structure or simply someone who stood near it. Silence again. This time heavier. Karen stepped back slightly. For the first time, she didn't interrupt immediately, because she understood something had already shifted beyond her control. The GM cleared his throat carefully. Ma'am Lawson, shall I prepare the executive access protocol for your review? David turned toward him sharply. Executive what? The GM hesitated, then answered carefully. Full operational authority restoration confirmation. That phrase landed like a final key turning in a lock. David went still. Restoration, he repeated quietly. And then he looked at me again. Really looked. Not as his mother. Not as someone he thought he knew. But as something he was only now beginning to understand. Mom, he said slowly. How long have you been able to do all this? I didn't answer immediately. Because the real answer wasn't about time. It was about choice. Long enough, I said finally. To know who only respects me when they think I have nothing. That silence after my words wasn't empty. It was irreversible. And for the first time since I stepped into this building, no one was laughing anymore. The showroom was completely silent now. Not the kind of silence from confusion. Not the kind from shock. It was the silence that comes after something has already ended, but no one knows how to behave in the new reality yet. David stood in front of me without moving. Karen no longer spoke. Even Ethan kept his eyes down. And the GM was waiting. Waiting for something only I could decide. I looked at them all once. Slowly. Carefully. Not as enemies. Not as judges. but as people who had all revealed who they were in the same room. Then I spoke. Before anything else happens, I said quietly, I want one thing understood. No one interrupted. That car you laughed at, I continued, is not just transportation. It is the only thing I ever kept after your father passed that was truly mine. A pause. My name. My independence. My distance from all of this. David's expression shifted slightly. Not defensive now. Just listening. Karen looked down for the first time. I continued. And I chose to arrive in it today. That sentence changed the tone of the room again. Because it removed accident from the story. It removed coincidence. It replaced everything with intention. The GM lowered his head slightly. I understand, ma'am, he said quietly. But I wasn't finished. I didn't come here to be respected, I said. A pause. I came here to see who still deserves to be part of my life when respect is not guaranteed by a title. David exhaled slowly. Mom, he said again, but softer now. We didn't know. I nodded once. I know. But this time, the words weren't cold. They were final in a different way. Not punishment. Resolution. Karen finally spoke, but her voice was fragile now. So what happens to us? That question again. But this time, it wasn't about control. It was about fear of loss. I looked at her, then at David. And for a moment, the entire showroom felt like it was holding its breath again. You asked what happens now, I said quietly. A pause. Now you stop seeing me as what is convenient for you to believe. David's eyes lowered slightly. Not in shame, but in recognition. I stepped closer to him. Not threatening. Just close enough that he couldn't misunderstand my words. You will still be my son, I said. A pause. But you will no longer speak for my life. That landed deeply. Not loudly, but completely. Karen swallowed hard. David didn't argue. Because for the first time, there was nothing left to argue against. The GM carefully stepped forward. Ma'am Lawson, shall I proceed with restoring your executive access across all systems? I paused, then shook my head slightly. No, the GM froze. David looked up sharply. Why not? He asked. I turned slightly toward him, and for the first time, my voice softened. Because control without understanding only repeats the same mistakes, I said. A pause. And I didn't build all of this to repeat anything. Silence followed again. But this time, it was different. It wasn't heavy. It was settling, like something finally finding its place after years of imbalance. I reached into my bag slowly and placed a small sealed document on the counter. The GM recognized it immediately. His eyes widened slightly. David stared at it. Karen didn't move. This, I said quietly, is not a weapon. A pause. It is a decision. David looked at me. What decision? I met his eyes. And for the first time since this began, there was no distance in my voice. Whether this family continues as a structure built on truth, I said, or remains a place where people only understand each other after it is too late. A long silence followed. No one spoke. No one interrupted. Then David finally stepped forward slightly. Not away, not backward, forward. And his voice, when it came, was no longer confused. It was quiet, but real. Mom, I don't want it to be too late. I studied him for a long moment. Then slowly, I nodded. And for the first time that day, the silence in the room didn't feel like fear. It felt like the beginning of understanding.